You've probably heard this a bunch of times from industry peers, or maybe you've even said it yourself. We should start a podcast. Okay, but then you do that, and what do you do afterwards? What's the show about? How do you make it look and sound professional? And once it's live, what do we do with it? How do we get it in the hands or in front of the eyes of people that we actually want to do business with? In today's episode of the podcast, we're actually talking about podcasting. We're going to break down 3 pillars: strategy, production, and promotion, to give you a green industry podcast that really kicks butt and everyone can ignore. Hey, welcome to Landscape Leadership Podcast. My name is Chad. I'm the host, and I'm so glad you joined us today. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We're actually going to do a podcast about podcasting. So it's a little departure from what we normally do here. I have joining me Scot Leonard from our team. Scott, thanks for tuning in today with us.
Thanks, Chad, for having me. It's interesting to be on this side of the podcast camera today.
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, that don't follow us, and listen to all of our content, watch our videos and that sort of thing, let me give you a little bit of background. So we are still a marketing agency that serves the lawn and landscape industry, contractors in the space. That's our primary function. But we decided to do something a little bit different. One of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to create a place for industry partners, people like us, like people that serve the industry, to help them produce really good podcasts. So Scott joined our team about 7-8 months ago. And Scott and I have known each other actually for about 4 years. And Scott, you actually came from a background where you did a lot of podcasting, right?
Yes, quite a bit. I was in it was a marketing agency just like this, but we focused on video first podcasts, specifically in the B2B realm. So I have a lot of podcasting experience.
Yeah. And so one of the things, one of the first assignments was, I was like, hey, Scott, we got this podcast. And I mean, it's okay. I mean, maybe it didn't suck. Well, maybe it did. But we have been podcasting for years, and you learn things along the way. It's just like anything. When you're watching yourself, listening yourself, you get better. When you're booking guests, when you're trying to interview them, when you're trying to produce clips for social, all that stuff, you start learning as you go. And internally, I was actually the workhorse that was like recording everything, editing all of it. It was just this tremendous workflow. I think in a single podcast episode, if I did what I was doing right before you came, I probably had about 4 or 5 hours involved by the time I was done. And it, like I said, it was still just kind of okay. So Scott, thanks so much for helping us to level up our podcast, because if you go back in our archives and you look pre-June 2025, watch some of those. I don't want to tell you this, but watch some of those episodes or listen to some of those episodes. They weren't watch
just a little bit.
Yeah, there's good content, but it's like it's a whole other realm now. So Scott, thank you first off for helping us improve the quality. Today, I want to talk to those of you that have been thinking about either launching a podcast to support the green industry, or maybe you are a green industry contractor. In some rare instances, if it's a unique show, that might be something that you might want to pursue. We actually here at Landscape Leadership, so we started a podcast network. So we want to have about 5 to 10 really, really well produced shows. I mean, like rivaling like when you watch Joe Rogan, when you watch New Heights, like all those
yes.
things you watch, and they're like, the value is just really great. So Scott's coming on today, and we're going to break down what we've kind of outlined as like the 3 pillars of a really great podcast. And there's a lot that we could say about this. If I just say Scott talk, he's going to talk for like an hour about podcasting. He's got a lot.
Yeah, we need to be careful.
Yeah,
luckily, I'm the one editing this, so I can chop up what I'm saying a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. So we're actually going to kind of like rein this in a little bit, try to talk about it at a high level, and then we might explore some of these sub points later on here. So let's first talk about the first pillar that we kind of talked about. And this is, behind anything that you do for business, especially marketing, is strategy. So we talk a lot about strategy. It's this big nebulous thing of like, what's your strategy behind this? But Scott, you've done a really good job of like nailing this down for brands of what you need to specifically consider within strategy. And I think this is a place where a lot of brands get it really wrong. They don't give it enough thought, or maybe they're not differentiated enough. So what's one of the first things you help someone that wants to create a really great green industry podcast? What's some of the first things that you cover?
I mean, the basic thing that we're going to go over first is usually, whether it's B2B, B2C, green industry, it doesn't really matter. But anytime you're dealing with a business podcast, you're going to be talking to either the person who started the company, the founder, the CEO. You're going to talk to maybe a marketing manager, maybe somebody who's high level enough in that company to understand why that company was founded. And that's at the foundation. I mostly deal with founders and entrepreneurs when it comes to doing business podcasts. So anytime someone starts a company, usually they start it for a reason, and it could be as simple as, hey, I wanted to be my own boss. That's probably at the base level. There's not a whole lot that you can dig from as far as the motivations for somebody starting a company. But if they want to talk about their industry, likely there's something that prompted them to start their own company, whether it's they felt like other people weren't doing it the right way. Maybe there was a pain point that they saw for their customer base or their ICP that they said, I can do this better and provide a better service. So I think at the foundation, what we need to try to look at is, first of all, what are you passionate about in the industry that you're in that prompted you to start your own business? And I kind of start from there, because whatever people talk about in that very first interaction when we're talking about why they started their business is a great foundation to lay for the podcast, because they can really draw out those, like you said, differentiators. And what I look for when I'm setting somebody up for strategy is, what is your unique point of view, or POV? You're probably going to hear me say POV a lot when we talk, but it's really about, there's so much noise on the internet, whether it's social media, whether it's podcasting. And to break through that noise, you have to have a unique differentiating point of view. Otherwise, you're just going to be adding to the noise that's on podcasting. In the same way that if you start a business and if you just operate your business status quo and you just do things the way they've always been done, and you don't have something that sets your company apart, you're just going to be another company on the first or second page of Google, or in the yellow pages. I'm dating myself there. But as far as, trying to break through the noise and trying to be noticed, you have to have a unique point of view.
Yeah, when we talk about noise, so one of the shows that we produce on our podcast network is The Deal Factory, which is powered by 3PG Advisors. And they're in the category, we're trying to create these categories on our network that are exclusive. So like Jeff and his team, they're the voice of M&A, mergers and acquisition. And we don't want another one of those shows. We want to differentiate. Right. And, there's a lot of noise in the industry right now about mergers and acquisitions, private equity, all that stuff. And one of the things I appreciated is how meticulous and detailed your process was of understanding what Jeff and his team's unique point of view is, because he's not just saying the same things that everyone else is saying, and where their organization sits within that whole mergers and acquisitions and how they're in between the contractor space and the private equity. Like, they have a very unique point of view. It's not that of the contractor. It's not that of the private equity firm. And they sit right in that sweet spot in the middle. And it's been really fun to listen to their episodes and hear, Jeff has some really strong opinions on things, and it's really great. That makes a good podcast. What about like format and tone? Because, I listen to a bunch of different podcasts, myself, some are business, some are just purely for pleasure and entertainment. And they all kind of have a different format. And I know, like, for me, like, sometimes when I listen to one, I'm like, oh, this would be hilarious if we could do this for our podcast, but it doesn't always fit. The format doesn't fit. And then tone is one of those things. Like, I think, Scott, you and I even find this, like, with social media, when we're doing that for clients, like, we as people have certain types of like senses of humor, and we may not want to do that in our brand. Sometimes we embrace that, we step fully into it, but sometimes that identity as a podcast show has to take on kind of a life or character of its own. So how do you find out and define that with someone that wants to create a podcast?
Yeah, for me, I think going back to like establishing the show and the premise of the show, once you figure out what you want to talk about and why you're passionate about it, then we move on to things like tone and, your format. But before I even try to figure those things out, like I don't really become a student of your, of podcasting in general in your space or even in your industry. Like I try to get to know your industry, but at the heart of it, the podcasts do well because of personality a lot of times. And so the content's king. That still is very much true. But if all you're talking about is the content and you don't package it well with a great personality and a great premise and a great format and flow, then it's just content and it's just going to be noise. So you have to give it that little bit of that X factor, and personality does that. So I think that what I try to do when I'm picking someone's brain as to their show, first I try to find out who they are as a personality, as a person, and talk about those things. How much humor do you want to inject into it? Are you conversational in the way that you want to talk about content with people in your industry? And even going back further than that, do you want it to be an interview-based podcast? Do you want to sit down and have a discussion and ask questions and have a back and forth dialogue like we're having? Do you want to monologue it? Those are things that I first need to get to know you as a person. Are you comfortable doing the solo, let's talk just to the camera? Kind of, you end up being a little bit more like a YouTuber in that sense. Or do you want to be conversational? Do you have goals outside of the podcast other than educating people or talking about your niche? Do you want to be a thought leader? Do you want to bring people in, like maybe your ideal client in to form relationships, a little bit of account-based marketing, ABM, right? So that could fit, if you want to do a guest-based podcast. Or do you just want to shoot the breeze with somebody and a titan in the industry that you want to learn from and would be valuable to your audience? They get exposure to your audience. You get the insights from the expert. So you can definitely go either solo, you can do interview-based, or one of my favorite formats is co-hosted commentary. So if you have, rather than chasing down guests every week or every other week, you can sit down with maybe another person in your organization who's, really highly an expert in their field, in your field, and you could just pick a topic then, and then your episodes becomes topical instead of based on a guest. And then you can inject even more personality into it because it kind of goes on that tier. If you go solo, all it is your personality. If you go guest based, then it's your personality plus the chemistry that you establish with your guest. That could change from week to week or month to month. And then if you have co-hosted commentary, you have the ability to keep a consistent chemistry between the two guests. And think about, some of the examples you gave, Chad, the shows, Joe Rogan is interview based, right? And so he has a different chemistry with every single guest that he brings on. New Heights is a perfect example of co-hosted commentary. It's two brothers. They have tons of chemistry. They've grown up together, played ball together. And so they're going to be really tight, and you're going to come back not just for the content, but also the personality and also the camaraderie and the chemistry that you feel in that guest. And it's almost, whether you're guest based or co-hosted, you almost get this voyeuristic fly on the wall. Your audience is a fly on the wall listening to two experts go toe to toe. And it's such a great format. So I don't know if that's what you meant specifically by format, but that's at the base level before we start talking about segments and before we start talking about like things we can inject into your show to make it interesting. We first have to figure out what the basic format is. Is it solo, co-hosted commentary interview? And
correct me if I'm wrong, but it's okay. Like, as long as you don't go off the rails and have too many varying formats, you can blend some of that, because like that New Heights example, it always starts off as the co-hosted, they're going back and forth, and then they have a guest that comes on, they interview the guest.
Absolutely.
You could have, like half of your episodes could be co-hosted and the other half could be interviewing someone from outside, which I know that's a big point of anxiety for podcasters, is because they're like, okay, we can probably get people that might want to be on our podcast, but scheduling them is difficult and doing all that. And then we're trying to schedule them all like in a batch in one day. And how do we get multiple people from all areas of the country? And you could essentially do like one episode that's co-hosted, another one that might be a blend of co-hosted and interview. Let's talk about format. Let's drill down a little bit more. One of the things that I know when we first started talking about podcasts, that you've just said over and over, is you have a philosophy that it's a video first podcast. Podcasts historically started off at audio and then have gravitated into video. We started audio, we did video. I did some with the intention of doing video, and then the video was so terrible, I just released it as an audio version because like somebody's lighting wasn't good, or there was awkwardness that you could see. So there are people that are listening to us right now, and I know this because in this space, contractors and company owners, they drive a good amount. So they like listening to podcasts while they're driving. And so maybe their preference for consuming content might be audio only. Why do you feel so strong about why podcasts should be video first?
That's a loaded question because there's so many answers to that.
Fire away. You're loaded up.
Yeah. Let's go. Let's just one by one here. I mean, first of all, just on the basic psychological nature of video, you're getting a lot more context for the conversation because you're adding body language, facial expression. You're connecting with your audience a little bit better because you have the whites of your eyes that you can see in the video as well. So there's a natural affinity and trust that you can build, not just on the audio basis. And by the way, you absolutely need to have both audio only and the audio plus video. So why not record it in a video format and then you automatically have the audio ready to go? So you can still exist as an audio podcast, but you're going to want to have that video component for a number of different reasons. I named the psychological reason for the first part of it, body language and communication. The second part too, and that helps honestly with your thought leadership, because you're going to come across as more authoritative being on screen, being on camera. I know a lot of people aren't thrilled about being on camera. They may think they have a face for audio podcasting or something like that. Can't say face for radio anymore. That's like, I guess, an outdated term. But I think at the heart of it, you do establish more trust being visually on the camera. So a lot of people don't like that. But another thing to take into consideration, Chad, is that we just recently saw within the last year or two, we saw Google Podcasts, which wasn't a huge contender in the podcast. You have Apple Podcasts and Spotify kind of still trumping as far as listenership. But Google Podcasts recently went away. It was merged into YouTube. So YouTube has its own podcasting arm. You can upload your RSS feed right to YouTube, and it will be audio only if it's an audio only podcast. But YouTube, because of their merger with Google Podcasts, because it's a Google product, they took over in the podcasting space, and they just recently took over YouTube being the number one podcasting platform. So as all these shows that are on YouTube converted into the podcast format, as all these shows that were video first took their business to YouTube, it slowly and surely crept over even Apple Podcasts being the number one podcasting platform. So, and then you have all the SEO implications of that. You have all the searchability implications of that with it being on YouTube. So YouTube as a distribution engine is going to be a much more potent distribution because of the searchability of it. If you can make a video and automatically have an audio podcast, why not do YouTube as well? And then you have both versions, you have it out there. The distribution just becomes much wider. You cast a wider net, right?
Yeah.
Then you also have one more thing on that. You have Spotify even put their skin in the game, seeing YouTube overtake as the king of podcasts. Spotify went to video first. So they're still an audio platform, but they now have video that they integrated, and they're bringing that up. And it's only a matter of time before Apple does as well.
And, it just goes back to communication in general. When like percentages of communication, like you have the words that you say are like a third, I think, of what you're trying to communicate. Mm-hmm. And then you have things like body language. Mm-hmm. Like you do an audio and you'll get tone of voice.
Yeah.
And you'll get pauses and you'll get emphasis.
Yeah.
And that's better than just writing. But when you get video, when I'm saying something, for example, like if I'm saying something and it's kind of a little controversial and I want the audience to know that I have empathy, like I can look into the camera and be like, listen, I get this. I know how hard this is, and this is a big deal. So when you're having that level of connection with video, you're getting all of the communication power that you could possibly have with your audience that way. Yeah. All right. Well, I believe in video first, and there's some other perks to that, which we'll get into a little bit later in here when we hit the third pillar. And I do want to talk about some of the nerdy stuff that I mean, it's nerdy for us, but like, I think it's really some of the major overlooked parts of producing a great podcast. But before that, I think before we talk about the actual production, there's this stage before production that you and I call pre-production.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, I've been a guest on a lot of podcasts with wonderful people, and a lot of podcasts in our industry don't do anything with pre-production. Like, to the point of, hey, we want you on your podcast. Sure, that would be awesome. What would you like to talk about?
Yeah.
Well, what do you want to talk about? I'm like, really? Like, you don't even have any needs? So then it gets to the point where I'm doing a pre-production for someone else's podcast, and I'm asking them questions about, what's important to your audience, what's something that's come up lately. Oh no, that's too big of a topic. Let's drill it down. Let's drill it down again, so we can talk about something really refined and unique for your episode that I'm not doing on some other podcast. And then an outline. Like, I went on one podcast outside our industry, and they didn't do any of this. It was that same kind of treatment. And then I gave them an outline of what I'm going to talk about. And the host actually said, this is horrible. The host actually said, oh, Chad's got an outline here. What's next on your next point? I'm like, dude,
no. Yeah.
Don't do that. Like this is, I build it in a way so that, I need guardrails, because I'll just ramble forever, and we won't know where I'm going to end up at. Same. So like, as we're talking here, I have another monitor with our outline, and I know where we're going next. And when you do a good job at pre-production with an outline, at least that's one component of this. It allows you to have nice segues as you kind of move to the next point. Yeah. And pre-production is a big part of that. So why do you think so many people in the green industry just think, hey, I have this interesting person, or I have this topic I want to talk about. Let's just turn the cameras on and let them roll, and let's capture something. Like, why is that happening, and what's the danger? What are they missing by doing that?
Yeah, Chad, that's not exclusive to the green industry. I mean, we've kind of joked over the years, and not we, but just like society in general has joked about dudes in their midlife, age, just grabbing a microphone and making a podcast, because the barrier of entry is so low, because there are such great, we're going to talk about gear in a second, but there's webcams out there that are real cheap that you can get on Amazon. There's microphones that you can get that you could just plug into your computer now. You don't need an interface. You don't need XLR cables. So the barrier to entry is very low. So it is just easy. And we're in post-pandemic age where we're just used to Zoom calls. We're so used to hopping on a call and talking shop. So it's just easy to send an invite to somebody or text them and say, hey, do you want to come on my podcast? And all you end up doing is shooting the breeze. So if there's no intention, and we'll talk about packaging a podcast later where we talk about the quality of the video and the audio and your segments and things like that. That's podcast packaging. But even before you get to the packaging, the video, the audio, cameras, microphones, that's all the gift box. That's the wrapping and the cardboard box outside of it. Again, content is king. So if you just come on a podcast with no intention, with no pre-planning, that's a mystery gift inside that you don't know what you're going to get. So what are the best gifts that you've ever gotten, Chad? When you get a gift that
behind them.
Exactly. So if somebody knows you well, they know you, they know what you want, they know what you need. You open that gift, and the package can look beautiful, and you're like, "This is a great gift." But if the gift inside is not what you need or what you want, that the package doesn't matter. So content's king at the end of the day. So I think you need to be as intentional as you can be with even just have a overarching topic. If you're talking to somebody in your industry who's an SME about one particular thing, let's go back to the example of M&A. If they're really, really good with M&A law, have that topic, maybe use ChatGPT or something to break that down into like 3 different sub points. And you don't need to go super, super deep with it, but just have a little bit of intention, because your listeners, like, that shows your listeners that you care. You're giving them the gift that not only looks and sounds good, but the content is good as well.
Yeah. And I think you're talking about 3 sub points, and I think that's gold too, because the one thing that I've found, like, even with like creating videos, people often think they're trying to cram as much of the message and the things that they're passionate about and important about into whatever that package is. So whether it's a video script, whether it's a podcast episode, this isn't your opportunity to talk about everything. If you're a really great podcast guest or a host, you're going to have other episodes that you can explore. So I've found that my my experiences in communication are the strongest when I look at what I want to say and I cut it in half. And sometimes I have to cut it in half again, because like I said at the beginning of this, you and I could talk for about 5 hours about podcast production, but we can't do that.
Right.
We're going to lose everybody.
No one will listen.
So so that's a natural segue. Let's talk about the next point now on my outline. I'm just messing around.
Right.
So I do want to talk about production, and a little preface this is Scott has a term that I've never heard before, but Scott's really AV. He's in the audio visual, and he is a gear slut, he says. So he like loves little trinkets and tools and gadgets and all that stuff. Scott, just be aware that our audience probably isn't going to know. They're not going to want to know all the like devices. Maybe there's some, and you can message us and we'll say, this is a great microphone or whatever. We're going to talk about the principles that kind of overarch this. What does a good podcast setting look like? There are two places that I typically see podcasts. One is a studio, which if you watch The Deal Factory by 3PG, they have a beautiful studio that they had someone build out for them. Scott actually went down because some of the lighting wasn't at the right spots. They kind of didn't know how to push all the buttons to start recording and doing all that. And he wrote them nice SOPs. I mean, like that's the premier thing. If you can have like a section in your office that is just the podcast studio, that's the way to go. But it doesn't serve everybody. So in my instance, this is a room in my house right now. So I have an in-home studio, and we've talked about, we're going to do a series later this winter where we're actually going to outfit this a little bit more and make it look more like a studio, because Scott and I have to spend a tremendous amount of time, well, Scott does, setting up things and getting them going in order to make it look like this. What does those types of setups, like just at a high level, what should they look like for people that really want to be taken seriously? Because right now, I mean, I see them in hotel rooms. I see them in the corners of living rooms that are light coming in from behind them. They've got shadows on their faces. Like, what are just some of the key components, like in just a minute or two, that you want to keep in mind when you have a studio?
You need to focus on your microphone probably first. So you want to try to find a microphone that's going to give you good quality. And with audio and video gear, you always get what you pay for. So if you see a deal on Amazon, $100 microphone, that's probably not going to cut it. To get a legitimate, good, even a USB version of a podcast microphone, you're probably going to be spending north of $300 for that to get a good quality microphone. So you always have to see it as an investment, because you can get microphones that promise all, everything in the world. And I keep bashing Amazon. I order things off of Amazon all the time, but you get what you pay for. And if you end up plugging in $100 microphone and into your computer and you wonder why it still doesn't sound like all the other podcasts you've been listening to, it's because you have to invest a little bit more. So that's the first thing. I think a lot of times you can get away with not the best video. You can probably use your a webcam or your built-in. I don't recommend it, but if you need to upgrade one piece of equipment first, it would be the audio. Get better audio, because you are going to be in both places, especially in the green industry. You might be listened to more than you're watched. So, and later we're going to talk about social. So you might want clips for social too, but a lot of times, the audio is going to be the king for your audio versions of podcasts, and even for social. Even though a lot of people scroll with their sound off and they're reading captions, if people see a great video clip from a podcast on social, but the sound is crackly, it's muffled, or maybe it's overdriven, they're going to be more turned off by bad audio than they will be turned off by bad video. Okay, so that's the first thing. So invest in a great microphone if you're going to try this, and then upgrade slowly. Then I would say, you could, even before you focus on your camera, lighting is even more important than your camera. A lot of times I don't look like this in the real light. I mean, this is a result of Scott knowing what to do with lighting. Like, I'm much uglier and much paler than this. So I assure you. So Chad, right now, what we have with your studio setup is we have 3 lights set up there, and we don't have any natural lighting coming in. We blocked out the light. Alternatively, though, I'm not using any lighting, but I am using an iPhone for a continuity camera. So if you're an Apple person. I don't know what the equivalent is of Android because I try to avoid Android like the plague. But if you have a Mac and an Apple,
just isolated, like there's probably like a third of our audience.
I know.
Just turn
Sorry.
the podcast episode off. Thanks.
We can edit that part out. No. So as far as like, you could probably find there's an equivalent, Android version of this. Just look up maybe what's the Android version of continuity camera. But if you're an Apple user, look up continuity camera. You can use the back camera, put it on a tripod or clip it to your MacBook like I have, and then you could use that as a webcam instead, right? But even still, if I had poor lighting, this camera wouldn't do anything. Yeah. So I have some natural lighting coming in, or if you get a ring light or something like that, just to at least boost your lighting game before you boost your video game, your camera game. So that would be the first thing. Get some good lighting. Google 3-point lighting setups or 2-point lighting setups for podcasts. They give you very simple instructions, 45 degrees. We won't get into the nitty gritty of that.
So you're not saying that like fluorescent overhead lights are not a good podcast lighting environment?
Not a good, no. Hotel lamp lights. Let's see. Maybe we should create a list of what not to do first before we talk about what to do. But you want to be able to have a controlled lighting source. So, and it can't be directly overhead. You're going to cast a lot of shadow on your face. It's not going to be flattering. So any shadow that you cast on your face, if you look at Chad right now, is going to be controlled. We have a controlled shadow, and then we're filling in that shadow with another light. So look those things up. You can learn about those, or you could just simply have a ring light. Anything's better than just using an overhead hotel light, fluorescent light in your office, something like that.
All right. So beyond the lighting, let's talk. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to geek out, to talk about gear, specifically cameras. Cause I know, like you do some video shooting for us for clients. Mm-hmm. I know people, some of the people that are watching this will be like, oh, if I get that right camera, mm-hmm. Or if I go a little cheap or whatever. So what's some general recommendations you would have on camera purchases for your podcast studio?
Definitely don't use your laptop camera. Avoid that if you can. Like I said, it's usable with the proper lighting source until you're ready to upgrade that. But if you really want to go and reach that next level, as far as, especially for deliverability on social media, for YouTube, when people do watch you, bringing that video quality up after you bring up the audio quality is just going to boost you to the next level. And just people are really going to trust you because they know the production quality and the content is there, right? So I think before you even start talking about like, okay, you don't need a $4,000 camera. You don't need even like a $2,000 camera. I would just avoid maybe the webcams that are $100, $200 on, places that you can get them online. You can invest again a little bit more to get if you type into Google like a content creator camera, a lot of times it can be like a DSLR-ish type camera, but more consumer based, not a pro model. And you could get something that is 4K. I definitely recommend 4K because that is video content is going 4K. Even if you don't post in 4K, anytime you take a larger sample from a camera like that and squish it down into 1080, it's going to look way crisper on social media and on YouTube.
On the editing side too, there are times where you want to crop in, and if you don't mm-hmm. have enough resolution, you can't. Yes. When you crop in, you lose the resolution, and then it kind of looks a little blurry and off and little.
Exactly.
Yeah, subconsciously it makes you look like a hack. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you want that space. So 4K is definitely the standard now, and you can get a lot of consumer grade 4K cameras for under $1,000. So I think you could look there. You don't have to worry about getting too much into specs, but make sure it's video centric. Focus on, does it have 4K? Can it get you like a good picture, a good quality? And is it content creation centric? A lot of these cameras companies, they know that content creators need these tools, and they'll market specifically to content creators. So they know what the needs are in the space. If you get a content creator package, you're good to go.
Okay. How many cameras? You and I have talked about this. I mean, mm-hmm. I have one camera set up right now. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So $1,000. How many cameras? And if you add more cameras, what does that do for your show and also the editing process?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point too, because if you're going to do remote like we are now, you need to invest in something like a virtual studio, whether that's like a Riverside. Do not use Zoom. Zoom is not made for, it's made for video conferencing. It's not really made, you can record, but it's not made for podcasting, and people can usually tell. So as long as you have one camera, and a virtual studio, you can do what we're doing all day long with a guest. We talked about the deal factory, right? The minute you want to have someone come into your space and sit down face to face, that just brings the level up tremendously, because now you have the chemistry of being in person as opposed to being virtual. And we all know the difference there psychologically. So that just changes the game and makes the content even better. But then what do you need? What do you do? Do you have the camera set out far enough so that you can see both of you? Yes, you can do that. You can get away with a one camera podcast setup if you have two guests, or, hosting a guest in the same room. You could even on the editing side punch in. We talked about 4K, having enough room to do that. And I've done that before, where we punch in and create individual frames for each of the host and the guest, but it doesn't look as polished as when you get that nice 3-camera setup. So you have one camera in the center to capture both guests, and then a camera on the side to capture your host, and another camera on the side to capture the guest individually.
Well, I think one of the things too is, like, if you imagine yourself as an audience guest, where would you want to be standing in that room? Like, in that conversation, do you want to be standing way in the back and kind of like think about how much you can connect with the conversation there? Or do you want to be sitting around the table? If you look at these multiple camera angles, the thing it does in your mind when you're watching it is it makes you feel like you're there. You get to see different lighting. The expressions look different on people's faces. And you get to see the togetherness, and then also the solo angle of someone talking, and get to be zoomed in versus just punching. And then, like, from the editing side of it too, like, you're not doing like a gazillion jump cuts where you're like in, out, in, out, in, out, because I mean, I want you to talk a little bit about editing and like the stuff you should cut out, but it allows you like a really natural camera change. And what people don't realize is there was like 2 minutes of stuff we just cut out in there.
Yeah. Exactly. So I'll get to the editing in a bit, but absolutely. I think one more thing people need to understand about camera angles as well is they serve the purpose to help you edit and cut things out, for sure. But they also help in, you have the physical, it's almost like you're turning the head when you're at the table, like you mentioned. So it's like you're focusing on each individual person separately. But it also, when you change up the camera angles, it makes the video more engaging. No offense to podcasts that do this, but if you just have the wide angle with two people on the screen, it's just going to be that shot the entire time. That's not as engaging. And you'll see that in your YouTube, analytics. You'll see that the engagement goes down over time because it's boring. So you got to switch up those camera angles. And then, like you mentioned, when we're editing, there was something with the dog needing to go out, and we needed to take care of that. So you can do that. So by changing your camera angles, if somebody has to think for a couple seconds before they answer, or if there's a word stumble and they're like, hey, can I say that again? It's very easy to cut to a different, since both people are on two cameras at the same time. They're on their individual camera and on the group camera. That way you can cut from their individual camera to the group, or vice versa, to seamlessly integrate those in and out points. So that's definitely an advantage too. And as an editor, that's super helpful when we have multiple cameras that we can choose to make those cuts, kind of hide them.
Yeah. I think that's one of the luxuries when you've actually been on podcasts or have done video shoots, that you feel the pain of the awkward, and then you see the magic of the editing, and you go, wow, they took out that whole part, like where I was using the wrong word for this, or I went down a rabbit trail, and or we had whatever happened that was disruptive. Someone came in the room or knocked on the door with a delivery or whatever it was. And a lot of people don't understand that. The reason those podcasts that look so seamless, they have a lot of crap going on back there, but it's all edited out. I want to talk one more thing about editing, and then I want to move on to like, okay, you've laid the groundwork, you've produced, you have the production value there. And then how do you make your podcast take off? But before we do that, I do want to talk about editing, because this is my past experience. This is what I see the predominant thing in our industry, what people are doing podcasts is all right, you're starting a Zoom call. Maybe you went a step up and you're using one of these other platforms. So you say, all right, okay, this is where we're going. And then you go, all right, I'm going to hit record. And you hit record and you let it go. You do a whole episode. And at the end, you kind of wrap it up. And then you kind of pause awkwardly together and you're like, all right, hey, thanks so much for coming on, whatever. So editing, at the base level is often trimming the bookends off. The like, let's get ready to record and okay, thanks. And you're recording that off, trimming that off. And then the step above that, I love AI tools. I mean, I really do, but when they're used properly. And one of the things that I've witnessed, and I can tell because we've been doing this so much, is there are great tools to remove filler words, which I like, but you can't go off the rails with it because then it makes your speech sound all choppy. And there is a degree of this that people appreciate the authenticity of maybe you saying once in a while, or you have a phrase you use over and over. But the other thing too is like, you know, when we're talking like this, I am pausing to think about my next thing that I want to talk about. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, sometimes you have people that are really slow processors and you do need to cut some of that out. But I've seen some of these AI tools that cut out so much space that it sounds like the person can't breathe. Like, how could someone actually talk this fast? And maybe it's like, oh, it was a really great conversation. It went for an hour. We're trying to get it down to 45 minutes. And hey, I got 7 minutes out of here. But I'm listening to these episodes and I feel out of breath. So what are like some really key important things that you do when you're editing a podcast beyond trimming the ends off and removing some filler words?
AI tools, like you said, are fantastic, but they have to be viewed as a tool. Like, and a tool needs a user, right? So you can't just let AI, it's not at the point where it can do everything on its own without checking it, you know? So when you put something into ChatGPT or any other of these AI tools, if you just copy and paste it and let it go, it's going to sound and look AI and people are going to notice. So when you go in there and you edit the AI is when you get better results because you have someone quality checking that. So whenever I use AI tools, I always make sure I go in and check it on the back end. If I start to feel like pacing is off, you know, because, and I never use those, you cut out this much, you can, it's like a tool that says, cut out this much whenever there's dead air, like anytime anything over 1 second, 2 second, 3 second. If you start to get crazy with it, leave it at the default setting, it is going to make the pacing sound unnatural. So you either bump those numbers up and only have it take out the sections of dead air that are over, I would say 3 seconds. But sometimes that is a human thing. Sometimes there is a lot, because it's video first too, there may be looks that are given, or there may be things that are happening in that dead air that AI does not recognize. So you always want to go over it when you're editing to make sure that it's paced correctly and human, that it sounds human. But I have a tool, and I won't say what it is, but I have a tool where instead of it automatically taking out the dead air, it just highlights the dead air for me so that I can go review it and say, yes, get rid of that. Or no, you know what? I want to leave that pause in there because that actually conveys emotion. I can't stand when AI starts to remove things just because we said remove dead air, but that dead air could actually say a lot more than words could, right? So it's just like in music. And I'm a musician, so I have to use this analogy, Chad. But sometimes playing music isn't always about the notes that you're playing. Sometimes it's about the notes you don't play. So that is important because phrasing in music and in conversation is important. Those pauses mean things. So I wouldn't trust AI to do all those little things, maybe just to make your workflow easier. But again, use it as a tool. Keep your hand on the tool.
Yeah, good point. All right, well, let's talk about this. So far, we've talked about having an intentional strategy that harnesses your brand voice, has unique points of view, develops your show format and style and all those things you're going to do, how you're going to approach the pre-production process. Then we talked about some of the things that let Scott geek out a little bit, talking about camera gear and sound and that sort of thing. And we talked about, okay, we're not going to just look like every other podcast out there. People are going to watch us and be like, wow, they spent a lot of money to produce this. This is really good. It's captivating. I'm hooked. The lighting's great. The sound's great. All these camera angles going on, all that stuff. Like you look like if you're a $10, $20 million company, $100 million company, $1 billion company, we got some big players in the green industry that spend pennies on their podcast production. So we have all that nailed down. But just because you create something doesn't mean it's actually going to get attention. So one of the things that we've done, like with the shows that we produce, is promotion of the podcast is mandatory. Like we are not going to just produce the podcast, give you the file and say, hey, make sure you post this to your social media. Yeah, it's horrible because everybody gets busy. You need to have somebody that's like, listen, my success is based on people seeing this show. And so from our standpoint, we include some of that in there. So I do want to talk a little bit about what happens. The episode's done. How do you get it out there into the public? Where are the places you're supposed to be posting it? What types of content are you supposed to be posting? And how do you think ahead about how you're going to make this happen?
What most podcasters don't realize is that this is a long game. You have to play the long game. And that means that you're going to have to make an investment and decide not just I'm going to start a podcast, but that I'm going to continue this podcast. Most podcasters, it's like 85 to 90% of podcasters never make it past episode 20. So in order to get into that 10% echelon of those shows that go the distance, you're going to have to plan on having at least that many shows. Anything less than that, if you peter out, if you start to waver a little bit in your schedule of your publishing, you're not going to make it. So you're not going to get to the point where you're starting to get picked up by the algorithms, starting to get recommended on the Spotify or the other platforms until at least episode 20. They're going to want to see that investment. So what do you do in the meantime? Obviously, okay, you know it's a long game. If you're committed to 20 episodes, you can grow your show organically just by being on YouTube. Again, where SEO is king and you can be searchable. But if you have no other awareness outside of the podcasting platforms and search, no one's going to find you unless it's word of mouth, right? So you're going to have to go the traditional channels, either, do sponsored posts or things like that. But if you want to grow organically without putting any money behind it, you're going to have to go to social. That's where everybody's posting their podcast clips. It's where everybody is trying to raise awareness. And there's a lot of noise on social as well. So you have to be thinking like a social media content creator, as opposed to a podcaster. You have to be able to take your content, your long form content in the podcast itself, treat that as a wheelhouse to pull other content from. So you can parse out smaller bite-sized pieces of content, and you can create other assets that don't always have to be, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but it doesn't always have to be video centric if you're concerned about having your face plastered all over socials. But you're definitely going to want to pull clips. You're going to want to pull out those bite-sized nuggets, those really good parts of your podcast that you just know when you're talking to your guest, your co-host, or even as you're doing your outline yourself and you're going solo, you know those parts where you're like, oh, that's gold, right? And those are the moments you're going to want to post on social. That brings people in. That's going to give people enough of a taste. It's like hors d'oeuvres. It's going to give you like a little bit of an appetizer to get you ready for the main course. So that's what we're going to try to do, is build that podcast funnel. And at the top of that funnel is going to be clips and other assets that you can post on social media.
Yeah, I think that's one of the short-sighted philosophies and understanding of marketing is I'm producing this thing, and in a vacuum, this is how it's going to exist. So for example, I'm producing a 45-minute episode. We're going to put it out on the podcast networks, and we're going to hope to attract people. There is so much mileage you can get out of content. I'm just passionate about repurposing and repimping and whatever you want to call it of a single asset. So I'll give you, this is an example. We're recording this full episode, which will probably end up about 45 minutes, maybe longer, because we can't shut up. But what we're going to do is there's going to be, there are 3 big points of this podcast. We're going to take 3 small clips out of each of those 3 points, which is 9 short videos we can post to social over the period of a month or a month and a half. In addition to that, we're also going to create some graphic carousel slides. And then maybe, like someone isn't watching anything, or they're in a place where they really want to watch video and they can just read it real quick, see some of the main points that we talked about in one of those sub points and get the message and get exposed to it. You can tease a link to the podcast. And then the other thing that I love doing is creating articles for our blog off of our podcast. We know that AI generated content, as far as written content now, no personality, very little point of view, kind of slop. Yeah. Everybody's kind of doing it. And one of the ways that you can stand out as a brand is by having a unique point of view. Well, Scott, as we had a conversation back and forth, we talk about a lot of points of view. We talk about very specific experience. You can't get that from AI. And so what you can do is a lot of these tools, when you produce a podcast, you can pull a full transcript. You can put it into Chat GPT. You can give it a prompt to tell it what you're trying to create and the tone. And the more you do that, the more it understands. And because it's so conversational, that writes an article and does 80% of the lift for that article from a conversation that you had. And then you think about that. Well, then, okay, if I write an article, I can probably do another 9 social posts with just like a little blurb, an image or whatever. I mean, you talk about like a podcast as just a podcast. That's not the point. It's like you have great conversations to share, but if you think you're only doing it in one place, you're like throwing out 80% of the recipe.
No, it's totally true. You have to treat your full length show as the well that you just keep drawing from and keep drinking from. And you're not obviously going to stick a straw down a well and drink, you can, but what's going to, satisfy your thirst? You pull stuff out and you start drinking little bits at a time. So, and then you keep going back to that well for more. So that's what we're talking about here. And it doesn't just have to be clips. You mentioned carousels. I mean, take your transcript, parse that out into, take one topic from what you talked about. And then because you interviewed the guest or your co-host or whoever, you remember that conversation. So you can take the AI, what that prompt gives you, and you can tailor it, personalize it because you were there. So I highly recommend the creator, the host is the one that goes in and parses those things out. You can use AI to help you, but again, it's a tool. Do not just let it do its own thing. Edit it. Make sure that you're going over it with a fine-tooth comb and injecting your personality into it. You can very easily create carousels. That's a very visual way. Just a real quick caveat to that. You also want to make sure that all your social posts, if they're video posts and they're clips from your podcast, always make sure they have captions. Never trust the built-in captions on social media websites or social media platforms. They could get it wrong, especially if you're in a niche where there's some like dedicated particular, verbiage that you want to make sure is spelled right. But always caption your social shorts, have some great readability there, have great readability on a maybe 5 to 7 page carousel. Those are going to do really well. And right now carousels are hot on LinkedIn and Instagram because they produce dwell time. So you want people swiping to the left there, and the social media platforms and algorithms are going to reward you for keeping people on their platform. So make carousels. You could even, everybody knows about memes, right? Pictures with words or like text. I've seen heavy hitters in the podcast realm, like Mel Robbins, for example, doing maybe a 2-panel conversation with a picture of her, like a still from her show, of her and her guest, or just her if she's monologuing. And then she has the text written, because again, like we talked about at the top of the episode, a lot of people scroll with their sound off, or they're not looking to watch a video because maybe they're at work, maybe they're in the bathroom, or maybe they're, scrolling somewhere where they can't have sound on. So they can read though. And so if you take an excerpt from the podcast and you create almost like a meme style 2-panel graphic image, those are also really engaging as well. And those perform very, very highly, almost better than clips sometimes. So you can vary it up. And there you have 3 different, well, if you bring the articles that you talked about, you have 4 different pieces of media that you can draw from one long form video.
All right. Well, Scott, again, like I said, we could talk for 5 hours about podcasting. Hopefully the audience has a lot to think about now. I would tell you that if you want to see some examples of some good podcasting, tune in now. If you want to see some bad examples of bad podcasting, go back in our archives about a year, even 2. The farther you go back, the worse they are. If you want to also see some really good podcasts, check out The Deal Factory by 3PG. And if you're interested in like taking your podcasting game to the next level in the green industry and really standing out, or if you are, one of these industry partners, manufacturer, software company, those unique spaces like peer groups and consultants and that sort of thing, we are looking for some exclusive categories on our podcast network. We would love to talk to you about how we can take a lot of this stuff off your plate, all the things that we've thought about that you won't have to think about, and make it much easier and produce a better quality for you. Scott, thanks so much for coming on Talking Shop today. Hope you all learned something. Talk to you later.